People were wondering, well, he's released, is he better or not? And
there's a big celebration that had been planned for his 100th birthday on June 10th. And I think there was a lot of hope that perhaps he could hang on until then, but it wasn't to be.
Yeah, Prince Philip's tireless support was a mainstay of the Queen's reign, the longest in the history of the British monarchy. NBC's Keir Simmons has a look at his long life of duty and devotion.
This is how the world knew him, standing by his beloved wife, the Queen, her loyal and lifelong companion. But from the beginning, life conspired to make Prince Philip his own man. He was born in Greece, into that country's royal family, and exiled with them when he was still a small child. A Spartan education in northern Scotland moulded a tough-minded achiever. He saw action on several battleships during World War II, a brilliant and brave naval officer. His 1947 wedding to Elizabeth lifted the spirits of post-war Britain. The next year, Prince Charles was born. 3 more children would follow. But Philip's world changed forever in 1952, when King George VI died and his daughter Elizabeth became Queen. From then on, his main role was as the monarch's consort and counsel. His relationship with the Queen, featured in the popular TV series The Crown.
Are you my wife or my queen?
I'm both.
His often brusque style and numerous gaffes made headlines at home and abroad, making a racist remark about the Chinese, killing a tiger, an endangered species, on a trip to India. His defense, some of his actions and comments were taken out of context. More recently, the Duke finally turned in his driver's license at age 97 following a car crash that injured 2 people and caused his Land Rover to overturn. But over time, Philip gained respect as an honest broker within his family, even as his children lunged from divorce to tragedy. He became an inspiration for the younger royals. His greatest achievement was simply being there for his wife, the Queen.
Without the Duke in her life, one can only imagine that it will take its toll on the Queen, because for so many years he has been her strength and stay, her rock, her friend, her advisor.
He lived to see his grandson Prince William's marriage to Kate Middleton in 2011, celebrated the birth of his great-grandson, the 3rd in line to the throne, Prince George, and was there for the wedding of Prince Harry to Meghan Markle. At age 96, after more than 22,000 solo public appearances, Prince Philip retired from royal duties. His legacy, a lifetime of service to his nation and his wife, the Queen. Keir Simmons, NBC News, London.
And just in the last few moments, Buckingham Palace announcing that Prince Philip has passed away at the age of 99. And we expect more word from the palace in the coming hours. But at the moment, they just said that he died peacefully at home in Windsor Castle. Let's bring in Daisy McAndrew. She's a journalist and royal commentator. And Daisy, unfortunately, this had been somewhat expected as Prince Philip was in failing health for some time now.
Yes, that's true. And as you were just saying a few minutes ago, he had been in hospital for a number of weeks. He had been transferred from one hospital to another to have what we would describe as a minor procedure. We understood it to be on his heart, which has given him trouble over the last few years. And then, of course, he was released from hospital just a couple of weeks ago and taken home. That was the last public sight of Prince Philip. He was seen in the back of that car going home. And of course, yes, it's not a huge surprise that he has passed away, but it also, as you were saying, his 100th birthday was coming up very, very soon, just in a few weeks' time, and he would have been the first consort, the first partner of a reigning monarch to have reached such an extremely old age, an impressive milestone. So there will be sadness about that, but of course much more. There'll be celebration, I think, of his life.
Would you put this in context for us a little bit, Daisy, if you wouldn't mind? Because I think a lot of people, at least on this side of the pond, we know of the Queen, we know of Prince, we know of all the princes, but when you hear about Prince Philip, you wonder just what will that mean? What will that loss mean to England?
It will be a big shock, because if you think about it, anybody in this country who's over, let's say, the age of 70 has only known the consort as Prince Philip. So that's pretty much the majority of the country who have become very accustomed to this very, very stable man being at the right-hand side of the reigning monarch, of the Queen. And of course, we know that she has entirely relied on him. Yes, in public, she walks ahead. She gets all the fanfare. She gets the limelight. But she has spoken many, many times, and all their close friends say that he is much more than just a right-hand man. He has been, by her side, helping her make decisions, helping her become the monarch, the longest-serving monarch. He was a very, very proud man. So I think when he first became the monarch's consort, it was a difficult role for him to do. He always thought he would be the head of his household. And then it turned out, as things turned out, that he wasn't. But he did forge a role for himself over the years. He had lots of involvement with charities that he set up that helped youngsters, the Duke of Edinburgh's awards, and so on. So he did have his own purposes in life. But equally, he never gave lots of interviews, very much the old school of the royal family.
But Daisy, what about inside? You know, it's always, when we talk about the royal family, we always have to keep in mind these dual dynamics going on. You have the royal family, that's an institution, the monarchy, and then you have a family. And what was his role in terms of keeping the family together as the patriarch? As obviously we've seen the ebbs and flows, the highs and lows that this family, like any family, has gone through over the years. What was his role?
Well, in fact, I just said he wasn't the head of his family. What I meant was publicly, outward-looking, privately, within their own family. He very much was the head of the family. He very much took the decisions and was very, very close to some members of his family. And I think Prince Harry is one of those members. He's had a tricky relationship with Prince Charles over the years. They're very, very different personalities. Prince Philip is much more of the gung-ho type, military royal, very upstanding, very brave, very stiff upper lip. Prince Charles has always been more of a sensitive soul, as I'm sure many of your viewers will know, deeply unhappy at school, more spiritual, perhaps. But then his other three children, Anne, Andrew and Edward, he's had very different relationships with those three as well, very close to Anne. She's probably the closest to him in personality, a real get on with it, carry on as you were type of personality, very sporty. He's very, very sporty person, Prince Philip, totally obsessed with ritual and exercise and keeping fit, a very light drinker, gave up smoking on the eve of his wedding, allegedly because Princess Elizabeth, the future queen, told him to. So a very, very disciplined man.
All right. Well, Daisy, we want to thank you for your insight, your expertise there. Now, joining us is British historian Andrew Roberts. We're coming on again this morning, breaking news that Prince Philip has died. It was just announced by Buckingham Palace this morning at 7 o'clock. And the last we had heard about Prince Philip was that he was in the hospital, was released about 3 weeks later. And we were pointing out this morning, I would imagine this did not come as a huge surprise to folks.
No, it didn't. He'd had also an infection 10 years ago, which hospitalized him, and again about 5 years ago. So his health hasn't been perfect, but he is, of course, or was, 99 years old, which in itself is a tremendous and, as you just heard, record-breaking thing for the royal family, almost.
Can you kind of give us your perspective from history of how Prince Philip figures in? I mean, it's such an interesting course of history that they have witnessed together, engaged in 1947. She was Princess Elizabeth at the time. Her father died. Suddenly, she's thrust into being the monarch. And he's in this role that, experts such as yourself say at first did not necessarily fit that well, that he had to go through that transition period of how to be as they say, consort to the monarch and be in this supporting role as a man in that era. How difficult was that?
It was quite difficult at first. Yes, you're right. I mean, he was always brought up very much to be a leader. He was a prince of Greece and Denmark. He had been a war hero. He was ready to take command of his vessel. And then, of course, King George VI dies. And instead of being an admiral, which is what ultimately he was going to do in the Royal Navy, he had to carry on for the next half century and longer, stepping 2 steps behind someone else. Luckily, it was a genuine love match. They adored one another, and he respected and admired his wife. But nonetheless, it was never that easy to always be 2 steps behind the centre of attention, as it were.
He had 4 children: Prince Charles, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew, and Prince Edward. And I just remember the image of when he was coming out of the hospital, and Prince Charles got very emotional in that moment. And it's rare that you got to see the son and father bonds like on display. And I found that striking.
Yes, he was a loving father. He was very, very different, and I think it's tremendously important to make this point, especially to an American audience, very different from the character that is portrayed in The Crown, which is very much a fictionalized version of the royal family, and one can frankly ignore all of it when it comes to the actual historical Prince Philip, who was a very different person. He was a loving father, as I say. He was somebody who all his children looked up to immensely, as well as the rest of the nation, of course.
And Andrew, I mean, we can't help but be in our present and know that the royal family has been in some turmoil over Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the allegations lobbed against the royal family. And I don't know if you have any insight into you know, how lucid Prince Philip was, how aware he was in his final weeks and days about what was going on, or whether he was shielded from it as he was in the hospital during that bombshell interview. But how do you think he would have felt about that? Do you have any information about what he knew of it, what he was aware of?
I don't, no, and there's no point really in speculating too much about these things, because one can always get it wildly wrong. If he was cognizant of the interview, he would have, of course, discussed it with Her Majesty the Queen, and it's very unlikely that Her Majesty would have put out that statement that she did without Prince Philip concurring in it. So I think we can assume that that he was very much on board with the overall family's response, which was that very short piece saying that that memories differ, that Harry will always be loved, and that they're going to investigate the allegations made against the royal family.
How close were Prince Philip and Harry? Were they very tight?
They were, yes, and I think Prince Harry will be devastated by this. Of course, he knew it was going to come, but nonetheless, he was close to his grandfather. They had the Royal Marines, of course, in common. It was Prince Philip, who was the Captain General of the Royal Marines, who then handed it on to Prince Harry with the words, "Don't screw it up." And then, of course, Prince Harry has had to give up the Captain Generalcy of it. So, so in a sense, he didn't really take his grandfather's words to heart enough, perhaps.
And Andrew, Prince Philip is often credited with helping to move the monarchy into a more modern era, especially in those early years, and trying to maintain its relevance by updating some of the ways it interacted with the world. Would you agree with that, and what impact did that have?
Very, very much so, yes. No, that's a very important point. It was in 1968 that he created the concept of the royal family being I suppose what we call today a soap opera kind of family, in that they allowed a documentary to be made for the first time where they were relaxed, they were on holiday, they were filmed up in Scotland at a barbecue. And they were being treated, therefore, for the first time in history as being a sort of natural family. And that, it was hoped, would make them more popular, of course. Not that they were unpopular in the late 1960s, but nonetheless, it would make them more approachable, perhaps, is the better word. And that was something that was very much down to him.
As I turn to Daisy McAndrew, also with us, a royal commentator and journalist, one thing that was pointed out to me was that, one silver lining of this last year and the pandemic is that actually the Queen and Prince Philip would have spent a lot more time together, really special months, its final year together at Windsor Castle, whereas in other circumstances they may have been in different locations more often. Yeah. What do you know about that? And talk about their relationship. I think you said it was a love match, which we can't take for granted when we're talking about a match that was made 1947 among royals.
Exactly. I think you're so right about the last year. Of course, for so many people around the world, it's been incredibly difficult being either working from home, losing your jobs, losing friends and families. But of course, for some people, it has meant some enforced time with their family, which is something that the royal family don't get very much, very often, because they are doing so many public engagements. So really, since lockdown was announced here in the UK last March, obviously, both the Queen and Prince Philip have been pretty much confined to quarters, confined to home, and as you said, have spent an awful lot more time together than they would have done. It absolutely was a love match. She's always maintained, and her close friends have maintained, that pretty much from the time they first met when she was just a teenager, she was pretty obsessed with him, or besotted with him. And he was, it's almost difficult for those of us who just know him as he has been for the last couple of decades to realise he was incredibly handsome and dashing when he was a young man. So many of the society pages at the time talked about this sort of Greek god type character, very tall, very upright, brushed back, blonde hair, very twinkly, very, very charming. And of course, many people have spoken, and Keir did in his piece, in his package for you there, about the Duke's gaffes over the years. But of course, one thing that they always showed was a human side. This wasn't a robotic personality. This was somebody who was constantly cracking jokes. Yes, some of them were deeply inappropriate, but people who met him, people who knew him, found him very, very engaging company, and not sort of stuffed shirt that you might have seen.
Yeah. Daisy, let me pause you right there because Boris Johnson is addressing the British public. Let's listen.
Inspired the lives of countless young people, and at literally tens of thousands of events, he fostered their hopes and encouraged their ambitions. We remember the Duke for all of this, and above all, for his steadfast support for Her Majesty the Queen. Not just as her consort, by her side every day of her reign, but as her husband, her strength and stay of more than 70 years. And it is to Her Majesty and her family that our nation's thoughts must turn today, because they have lost not just a much-loved and highly respected public figure, but a devoted husband and a proud and loving father, grandfather, and in recent years, great-grandfather. Speaking on their golden wedding anniversary, Her Majesty said that our country owed her husband a greater debt than he would ever claim or we shall ever know. And I'm sure that estimate is correct. So we mourn today with Her Majesty the Queen. We offer our condolences to her and to all her family. And we give thanks as a nation and a kingdom for the extraordinary life and work of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson just outside 10 Downing Street in London as the news has just broken there and here. 7 o'clock Eastern time, the afternoon London time, with the announcement that Prince Philip has died at the age of 99, married to the Queen for 73 years. And we can see some of the activity going on in Buckingham Palace. It appears that is the official statement that was released. And now, as tradition has it, they're posted physically on the gates of Buckingham Palace. The news that perhaps was expected for the Duke being 99 years old, but certainly met with heartbreak, especially because he was, on June 10th was to turn 100 years old, a celebration planned, and he, by all accounts, so hoped to mark that milestone.
Yeah, he was always so vibrant. I mean, they talk about him driving a car until he was 97 years old, and this is someone who we always saw front and center right next to the Queen. And, it's funny, we talk about the royal family and the prince dying, but this is also a wife who's lost her husband on this day, husband of 70-plus years. And there's probably, a lot of mourning going on.
I was thinking of that very thing as we turned to NBC's Matt Bradley in London when Prime Minister Johnson was talking about, it's the Queen, but she's the wife that lost her husband, and a husband who has been by her side since she was a teenager. The two literally grew up together under the most extraordinary of circumstances.
Circumstances that are really hard for the rest of us to ever identify with, because, as an American living here in London, and I've lived here for the past 5 years, I mean, it's hard to imagine how the royal family really has found themselves in these circumstances. They're so singular in their experience that it's so different for them. They really are a part of the Constitution, as Boris Johnson, that's why he was alluding to this. That's why they're in such a complicated circumstance. Guys?
Matt Bradley, thank you. We're going to stand by. We're going to have the latest on this breaking news throughout the morning. Most of you will return now to the Today Show. I'm Savannah Guthrie alongside Hoda Kotb. This has been an NBC News special report on the passing of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, at the age of 99. And good morning, everybody. It's 7:30 here on a Friday morning, and on the Today Show, we've just been in a special report as this breaking news crossed right as we were coming on the air this morning, Hoda, that Prince Philip, the husband of Queen Elizabeth, has died at the age of 99.
Yeah, he was in the hospital. He was released